will be picked at appropriate time by the speakers. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Kishore and Arun, and they will start today's presentation. Hi, Kishore. Hi, Arun.
Hello. Thank you so much for having us.
Arjun is just bringing up the screen for the presentation. Yeah, before we get started, thanks everyone for joining in. Some familiar faces, many unfamiliar faces. Yeah, we're really glad all of you could take out some time, talk to us. What we're here today is to talk about embracing curiosity. This has been on our mind for a while, and we've been trying to kind of do different things to feed our curiosity, and we want to share that experience with you today, really. Quick introduction, we'll get into this a little bit more. My name is Kishore. I'm a UX designer on the Google Pay team. Arjun?
Yeah. Hi guys. I'm with Swiggy. I'm a product design architect there. I look at the consumer app over there in terms of user growth and retention, like Carol mentioned a while ago. And today we want to talk to you guys about something which is a little close to us. So what we mean when we say embracing curiosity is basically we want to take you through some philosophies which we have sort of adopted over the last few years of work in, products which are very heavily focused on a lot of people, masses, building for scale. So we want to talk about how curiosity has helped us in our active jobs and also in different walks of life as well. So it has also been something which we have embraced at a personal level, and we've been able to take it into different places and avenues which we a few months ago did not think was possible. So long ago, this is how it started for me. What got me into design was something very childish. I went to design school with the hope of, just being able to animate a lot. And I was obsessed with Marvel movies and Pixar and the whole shebang, right? I still am a pop culture geek, right? So this is what, set the premise for me for design school, because in my mind, I was in Pixar already. Design school just seemed to be one of those things I had to get out of the way so that I could just get back to making amazing movies with John Lasseter and Steve Jobs and the likes, right? So then with that thought process in mind, I went into design school, and that's where a reality check happened. So apart from, being literally kicked in the ass a lot, you also realize that, there are some things which you're really good at, and there are some things which you will never be good at. So turns out drawing at a good scale to become an animator was one of them. But around this time I also developed a big interest in, graphic design and doing a lot of brand related work. So I retained some aspects of my love for animation and did a lot of illustrative work, and eventually ended up exploring a career in graphic design, where I joined a very fast-paced startup where I started being involved in a lot of core brand strategy and growth strategy for it. But at some point of time, I started becoming more and more intrigued by the process of building products, and a part of me just felt like, I want to be involved in building these products rather than just talking about what's being built. So that's where I came to a bit of a shift in my thought process, and started looking outward in terms of product design roles, which led me to Ola at that point in time. So with Ola, it was an open play field, which I just got out of the blue, right? I was able to leverage everything I picked up in my college in terms of graphic design and brand design. I was able to leverage that and also bring that into product design. I was able to start, exploring a lot of products. And the big thing which I realized was, I realized at this point in time that I'm a massive impact junkie, and Ola was the ideal place to kind of cater to that impact obsession which I had. And this is where I was able to hone and, really dive deeper into building products. So I've done a bunch of new initiatives in Ola, like Ola Electric and Ola Wheels and Ola Play. Ola Wheels was just a prank which we pulled, and that was a lot of fun. But apart from, it just added to the fact that we really started enjoying doing these sort of projects where we were able to just have fun and also give a lot of delight for our users as well. So Ola Play was one of those flagship products which we ended up building. And over the last 3 years, I've been with Swiggy, and I wanted to continue my obsession to understand the Indian consumer. And Swiggy was around 2.5 years ago when I joined Swiggy, they were in 50 states in the country, and today they've grown to a massive scale. So I sort of picked up the right flywheel in Swiggy at that point in time, and I got to learn a lot. Well, mostly my days involve me begging my product manager to change my CTA button, which I've designed somewhere, into something fun. But apart from that, I also look at building a lot of user growth tools like our subscription platform, Swiggy Super, something which I helped build. And I also look at better ordering experiences for our users. So a lot of menu merchandising. And I also look at building tools like, to create platform sanity. So ratings are very important when you order a food, decide on a restaurant. So these are the kind of projects I take up usually. They're heavily invested in user engagement. Yeah, Kishore?
Yeah, I have a very similar story. Although unlike Arjun, I think I could draw, so that was slight edge, and which also meant
Low
I don't know.
blow.
Growing up, having that inclination towards art, I was also interested in photography. As you can see here, from a very young age, I've been trying to get the right frame. And when I got to painting most of the walls in my house, my parents thought it would be a good idea to send me away from home. And that was really my opportunity to go outside and like be elsewhere and be sort of independent, right? So the natural step for me to go to was go to a design school. Going into design school, Arjun and I went to the same school. We went to MIT Institute of Design. It was a very beautiful place, as you can tell from the picture. But we were also the second batch. So I joined MIT Institute of Design, wanting to be an industrial designer. I thought, again, the same Jonathan I've influenced. I thought I'll be designing shoes and I'll be designing hardware. But the expectation and the reality were very, very different. I spent very much less time sitting in beautiful gardens and drawing buildings and people. I spent a lot more time just having fun. And this is very interesting because a lot of learning for me was from my peers and from my seniors and from my friends, as much or arguably even more than the curriculums and the faculties. Which constantly meant that we were looking out for different ways to learn, different things to learn, which sometimes was related to our core course. Sometimes it was not. And that led me to my first internship, which was at Design It. Design It is a Scandinavian design agency based in Copenhagen. And I spent about 9 months interning there, which really opened me up as a designer, as a product thinker. Um, Mostly because of the kind of projects that I was working on. So from designing typography and from designing brands and logos, I was put into the context of designing for broadcast for the very first time. So I was given a project to redesign the weather channel for the national television channel of Denmark. And it was a brand new experience for me because apparently designing for broadcast is not just making videos. There is much more technology layers under it. So this is also the first time I'm kind of understanding the context of design plus technology and the fact that when you stream to people in an entire country and who has different TVs and different TV sizes, you have to think about all these different things. That is the first exposure. I also got exposure to designing for physical spaces, like museum designs, digital design for museums, which was a first time for me because thinking about design at such large scale physically and in the context of a space, I had never done that before. And that kind of started pushing me as a designer and built my curiosity outside of some of the core things that I thought I would do when I was in design school. From there, I went on to IDEO and to Adobe. IDEO was a very interesting experience because, again, following Design It and being in a consultancy experience, I was talking to different clients every day. So one day I was talking to a medical company, another day I was talking to a financial company, and you really had to learn all this, a little bit of all these businesses in order to kind of understand their problems and empathize with that, and also empathize with the users. But I really got the first bite of designing consumer experiences at Adobe. I was sort of in the right place at the right time. And I was put in charge of redesigning the Acrobat experience for Acrobat 11 back in 2015, which is a milestone design. This is when Acrobat went from being a single purchase product to document cloud. And I was asked to lead the Android redesign of that. And that really gave me the kick of designing for consumer experiences with such large impact. And when that project was over, I felt that greed and I wanted to do more of this at a bigger scale. And that's what really took me to Google. So in Google, I joined as, like Carol said earlier, I joined as the first designer on the next billion users team. So we were still trying to figure out what products to build and which country to build for. And I was also fortunate to be, as a part of that, I was also fortunate to be the first designer, one of the founding members of what is today the Google Pay app. We launched as Tease a few years ago, and today it's called Google Pay. So to summarize both our journeys here, right? What we're trying to say here is when we went to design school, we did not know that this is what we would be doing today. I did not know that I would be working on digital experiences. For God's sake, I wanted to be an industrial designer, and this is where I ended up. And one thing led to the other, and it's always been that curiosity for one thing that took to the next step and to the next step and so on. So you must be thinking, sure, you're talking about your life journey and all that, but what has this got to do with curiosity? We'll get to that in a second. Before that, I want to say one story. So I spoke about growing up. I grew up back in Kerala, and trains has always been an emotional thing for me. And this is primarily because if you're in Kerala, if you're taking a train, it's inevitably to go to a long distance place. And more often than not, for us, it was a vacation. And when I think about trains, the first thought that comes to my head is the time that I went on vacations to different places, and also really spending time with my family. When going to Pune, going to college in Pune was not very different. From Kerala to Pune, I often spent 30 to 34 hours traveling in train every 6 months both ways so that I can go home. So again, now the thoughts are getting associated to, when I think about trains, I think about home and I think about spending time with my family, right? This also meant I spent a lot of time on IRCTC website. It was not half as good as it looks like today, but really spending a lot of time on IRCTC website, trying to figure out the different kind of tickets, trying to figure out how to get the Tatkal ticket as fast as possible, as soon as it opens up at 10 a.m. It was 10 a.m. back then, as soon as it opens up at 10 a.m. So all these hacks and all these skills, and before I knew it, I was the go-to expert for booking train tickets for my entire extended family. And back then, it felt like a completely useless skill to have. It would not have anything to do with my job. This is not something that I was going to make a career out of, right? But surprise, surprise, cut a few years. A couple of years ago, I was responsible for designing the train booking experience in Google Pay. I was working with a cross-functional team that existed over 2 continents, 3 countries, many time zones. And now this entire team, which was brand new and put together to solve this problem, had to understand an in-depth understanding of the whole train booking experience in India. And this is where my skill as the go-to expert really came in handy. And I knew almost everything about train booking and everything that it took to make the user experience better. And I was able to bring my entire team up to speed so quickly because I had that context. Again, I did not know that this would really happen back then, but it's always easy for me to look back and connect the dots. So you might be thinking this is a one-off thing. This does not happen frequently enough. But in my experience, it's been happening very, very frequently. One more story for you. So
I mean, I just want to add to that. Sorry, go on, Kishore.
No, go ahead.
So I just want to add to that, like the IRCTC website for the uninitiated is basically that second planet in Interstellar, where 1 minute on that site is basically 7 years in real time. That's actually what happens. So personally, I know for a fact that there's a huge bunch of people who are just extremely thankful to not have to go via the IRCTC channels again. And it's a miracle that Kishore still has, like, you know, no gray hair after having spent so much time on the IRCTC website. Right. So my story,
but yes,
sorry?
Slightly balding, but yes. But I think, yeah, I think it's that really, right? And for those of you who are not from India and who are not familiar with IRCTC, IRCTC is the single stop to book long distance train tickets in India. There is one organization which sells tickets for every train, which is the largest train network in the world. So there's only one website. It's owned by the government, and the website looks sort of like that. Again, one more story for you. Another interest of mine growing up, like every Indian kid, was cricket. So this is me. If you don't believe that I'm that excited about cricket, on the top left, the person with shades is me. That's me watching the India-Afghanistan match last year in the Cricket World Cup. So like every other Indian kid, I was extremely interested in cricket. But again, working in payments, working in finance, did I ever think this would be in the context of my work? Definitely not. Interestingly enough, last year we introduced a game on Google Pay where you could really play a game and win scratch cards on Google Pay, right? Win rewards on Google Pay. This was for India, and it was really interesting for me to bring some of one of my favorite sports into the context of the product that I'm working on, which is seemingly unrelated, but still able to kind of build that delight for the user just by leaning into some of my interests. You'll see here that it's vada pavs and chilies and cutting jai who's playing cricket. Like I said earlier, I went to design school in Pune, which is in the state of Maharashtra, which is known for vada pavs and chilies and cutting chai. So could not help but bring that as well.
Yeah. I mean, at least like you kept it to your products. I retained all the vada pavs and chai from college time in myself. So it shows very evidently now. So my story is also very similar in terms of how my interest came in and sort of overlapped a lot with my work. So like I had spoken about Ola Play. So Ola Play just exploded way too quickly, and we just didn't understand that product when we launched it. We knew we had something going for us, and we knew that we had a lot of active audience coming in and engaging with our product, but we really didn't know where to take this. So Ola Play entered a place where we were just trying to figure out what this product is all about, whether we'll even make money out of this, and there were a host of conversations happening right at this point of time around should this become an ad monetization platform, or should this become should we just put in more apps or more content and crack more partnerships, right? And naturally, when you're a designer, a lot of these conversations they just go whoop right off the top of your head. So like it just so happened that out of one of many days where I came back home and I was tuning in on catching up with my Marvel mania as usual, and which is when the idea came to me that maybe I could inject the thought process of ad monetization and like content and bring something into the Ola Play experience. So this was just out of the blue. It was just an exploration which I thought I would enjoy doing, and it seemed like a good way to kill 4 or 5 hours before I could crash, and that's what I ended up doing. And I took this idea to my business counterpart and my product counterpart at Ola Play at that point in time, and surprisingly enough, we were able to take this idea to a lot of partners. We started speaking to a lot of content providers like Paramount and Netflix and Prime and etc. And eventually we were able to crack uh, a test run on this where Optimus Prime literally rolled in and like came to our rescue with this idea, and we were able to execute a brand campaign for them, wherein the idea was very simple, right? A movie, when it's out in the market, it has 2 months of relevance, right? Wherein there's like 1 month of build up time in terms of trailers, etc. And there's 1 month of actual time where not too many people have seen the movie yet. People are still churning in and out of the theaters to see the movie. So the idea was that we prime Ola Play as an extension for marketing for these movies, right? And they get to come into the Ola Play device and take over the experience in a way that they could host some content, some teaser content, and just theme the device a little easier. And that was it. It was a very simple premise. It promised a lot of impression branding to these brands, and that's great for them because at that point of time, Ola was doing 1.5 million rides a day. So this was a really captivating way to captivate audience. And if it helps, like when you're stuck in a cab, you're really stuck in a cab, especially in Bangalore, right? So they could not have found a more captive audience than in a cab. So it just added up logically, and we were able to execute this amazingly fun campaign. It was great fun for us to build, and we suddenly realized that we were sitting on a steady revenue chain as well. So this product finally made business sense to us, and this sort of narrative started coming back in a lot of ways, right? My obsession with Pixar movies and like my liking fondness for Wall-E and the whole character design development which happened over there ended up in us being able to build a nice April Fool's campaign for our users as well, right? So this was a product we built called Wheels. So Wheels was a smart assistant powered, tool which is made for last mile mobility. So these sort of interests, for some reason, they just kept coming back to us in our day to day, and we were suddenly able to, look at it in a lens where, okay, fine, I spent a large part of my life watching movies. Can I use that somewhere? Kishore spent a large part of his life in trains. Was he able to use it somewhere? So it just so happened that we were actually able to implement these things into products, right? So a lot of it came. You could write off a lot of this by saying that we were just at the right place at the right time. But one thing which did happen was that we ended up retrospecting a lot into how did we go about this, right? So what we understood was that these were things we were very passionate about, right? Outside of our work, these were things which we were very passionate about, and just out of that passion for travel and for movies and consumption of media, etc., we just ended up being very curious about these fields, and we just at that, because of which we ended up finding out a lot more about these fields, right? But then we never thought earlier that we were empowering ourselves and priming ourselves in a way that we were able to take all that we learned in that, by being curious about these topics. We were able to take all this and actually look at it from the lens of our organizations, right? And then we started walking into these meetings where we just started seeing opportunity, and that was something which spoke to us in a lot of ways, in terms of how we kind of adopted curiosity and adopted a development for passion and bringing it into our day-to-day product lives, right? But this is the reality which Kishore will shed some more light on.
Yeah, I think after hearing these stories, you must be thinking, yeah, sure, you found some way to connect some of these interests that you had into the product context. Big deal, right? Like I'm spending most of my days thinking about lead generation and consumer insights and conversions and CTRs and whatnot. Hopefully, we will help you connect some of these dots and help you organize your curiosity so that you can then start translating that into your day-to-day work. And why do you need to do that? There are about 1 billion people who are coming online for the very first time in the next 3 years or so. And these users are using a smartphone to come online, and they've never used a computer before. Their use cases are different, their mental models are different. For example, when you think about a floppy disk, when you see a save icon with a floppy disk next to it, you understand what that means, because you and I have used computers and we kind of recall the times when we used to save things into a floppy disk, and that association is really, really strong. Imagine someone who's never seen this and sees this floppy disk icon and it's supposed to mean save. It's very hard for them to relate to, because it's an era that they completely skipped. So as you think about these mental models, it requires you to be more and more creative, because people are absolutely scared of technology. So a study done in the United States a few years ago said that most people are more scared about technology than death. I'll give a second for that to sink in. And it's understandable, right? Because we hear conversations about robots, and we hear conversations about going to Mars, and all of this sounds really, really scary. And in order to understand users' emotions, and especially in a context where the people who are coming have different mental models, you really need to understand the emotional aspect of design and the product, and how do users think about your product, and what are the emotions that your product or interfaces or even features really invoke.
Yeah. To add to that, right? So tech, when it actually does its job, right, or doesn't do it at any level, it's a very mechanical entity. Like, is perceived as something which is very dry and mundane, right? At best, this is what my experience with tech is on a daily life. But the problem is, in today's day and age, all tech is about outreach. It's always about making sure that there's a user who's consuming and interacting with it at a constant basis, right? So that's where your people quotient comes in. People are not this way. Like, people do not perceive tech in a very dry fashion. They always have a certain reaction to any piece of tech which they see. So when tech would put this forward to me, when I get a notification like this, I'm not passive about it. I'm pretty angry. This is something which triggers an emotion in me. This might just be the 20th cab that's cancelled on me at that point of time. So I don't even know Manjunath. There are people on both sides of this tech interaction, right? There's a driver who has cancelled a cab, and there's me who has tried to book a cab. So I am really angry right now, even though I don't know this person at all, and I don't understand his reasons for canceling this. But then tech has been that medium for me to, inject my anger over there. And that's true for so many of our apps, right? Every single app in our phone, right, which is something we use every day, is always built in a way that it triggers emotions. So even though they mechanically do this, they just show notifications. But this is how I see them, right? This is how all of us would see. Like, I might be really annoyed with my Facebook, and I might just be avoiding having to wish birthdays to people. I might be really scared of checking my email. That scares me. I might be I might be on a job hunt, and at that point in time, every single notification I get on LinkedIn is me skipping a heartbeat. And I might always stay fat because, well, Nike has kept trying to push me, but I've not really embraced that. And yeah, let's not talk about dating apps. This is like that one dopamine hit which happens to us like once in like 4 months or 5 months, and then this is what happens 2 days later. So this is how tech is kind of working around us in a way that we are very, very attached to every single interaction we have with technology. So this perception is something which kind of honed us into going into a place where we want to embrace technology as builders, as product designers, and like product thinkers. We want to embrace it, and we realize that we need to start looking outwards in this process, right? There's a lot more we need to expand our worldview in terms of like how we look at building technology and how it affects people we build it for. There's a lot of emotion around it. There's a lot of behavioral ethics and science around it. So, but then with this, we also by embracing the fact that we're going to take tech aside, we also embraced a lot of questions being posed to us. So I started entering meetings with marketing where something I would pitch would be questioned in a way that, are we that brand? So I had to start speaking to them and understanding with them as to why can we say this and why can we not say this. Every bit of communication we write on the products we build has an impact or a perception to our end customer, right? So marketing, having these sort of conversations with marketing outside of our design team just started triggering all those aspects more and more. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure Kishore can add to the MVP. It's our favorite word to hate is MVP. So
and this is a conversation that happens arguably on a day-to-day basis in our jobs, right? We're constantly trying to negotiate with different teams. We're constantly trying to really figure out what the minimum product that we should ship is. And of course, designers often talk about minimum viable product versus minimum lovable product and what that means to users and things like that. But in most of these cases, what has really been important for us, or the really big moment for us, has been to take a step back from what you are trying to push for, understand where your other stakeholders, like your engineers or your product managers, are really coming from. What is their motivation? What are they trying to optimize for? And really speak their language. So if you're talking about business, talk about the metrics, talk about the value, talk about the money that you're going to make. If it's about engineering time, talk about simplifying an experience enough for you to get what you want, but also to solve the problems that the engineers are thinking about, right? But you can only do that when you actually understand what the medium is and what the language is. And you can build that language only when you stretch yourself and build that curiosity or to understand what they go through and what their work is like.
And speaking of money, it's something which has taken me like 3 years to say this, but I am in complete awe of the business teams and the kind of pressure they kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis. It took me a good 2 years to develop a certain level of empathy with the heart of our business, right? When these questions are posed to us, design teams more often than not have not been able to necessarily have effective answers like earlier on, right? About whether we can promise conversion. But that's not the point. When someone asks you about conversion, I realized later on that it's not necessarily about questioning your design decision. It's literally coming from a place where they need to also meet a metric. Like Kishore just said, we need to understand that these guys also have their challenges and they also have agendas to meet. So walking into a business meeting and also being able to deliver on their needs. You're actually, that's the beauty of it, right? We're building things very collaboratively, so we all need each other in a big way. We need each other to empower and kind of expand the kind of products which we're building as well. So each of these insights, they suddenly start adding exponential value to us. So that's what kind of led us to the thought process of how we build together. It's a highly collaborative process. And what kind of helped us as we started going into more and more of these uncomfortable conversations, which we thought were uncomfortable, eventually we started feeling very at home with these sort of setups, right? We realized that we need, for us to now build products the way we build products, we need all these variables. I need my product manager to come and tell me how important this is, where in terms of the company at this point of time versus the company in the next 2 years or in the next 1 year. So I need to know what the product roadmap is, what the strategy for the company is, and I need to know from the business what they want out of this product. I need to know from the supply angle. So I work in a very heavily operations dependent company, and for me, every design decision I need to take has to be very, very cognizant of the fact that my operations are still running the way they run, or they get better. I can never do something to hamper my operational teams. So these sort of things started coming in a big way. So what helped us, some of the things which helped us in terms of taking these meetings and understanding them, was the fact that we understood that design is all about storytelling, right? We're walking into these rooms where there are people from all over in different sort of backgrounds, all of them running different agendas. So your business person is trying to meet a metric, your product counterpart is trying to essentially think about feasibility and look at how to build this product and capitalize on things. Your engineering counterpart is literally thinking about how to actually execute this in the kind of time frame you need it executed. So, but then the advantage you have here is you're able to take all these multiple thought processes and you're able to bring them into a product context. You can visualize these articulate their thoughts for them and bring it forward. So we realized that design, if it's a really good movie, when it's a really good movie, it better have two subtitles, right? One is us as user experience designers to be able to design for the user and speak the user's language all the time. But there's another lens to it which you miss, which is to be able to talk about your collaborator, to be able to make sure that you can design in a way that you're making things easier for them, or you're exciting them, or you're making sure that this is something which is going to add value to how they build your product as well. So we realized that we need to always be speaking two languages, right? And we understood the value of being inclusive. So I think both Kishore and I have fallen into that trap early on in our careers, where we were all about the design silo, and that's that's kind of because of where we came from. We both went to the same college setup where we were surrounded by designers, right? We were kind of, the worldview we were exposed to was all about design, and we really didn't we were never in a situation where we needed to be inclusive beyond this. So this is something which we picked up, with more and more work in the industry, that we understood that we really have to be inclusive, and we always have to show and tell, right? This is something which has gone time and again to proven completely, or else, you trust me, you don't want someone else to scribble on a whiteboard. You have that right, please. But for you to exercise that right, you always have to show and tell. So this is something we realized, and this is what kind of helps us in a lot of the kind of meetings and products which we strategize at this point in time. Now we are in a place where we are able to work with our business counterparts and project more and more ideas, and even think of more and more revenue channels for our organizations. That's because we were able to kind of get out of our comfort zone, just be curious enough and develop some curiosity outside of our comfort zone, and we're able to do this with that. So these are some things which have helped us there. So
yeah. So before we go ahead, Arjun, there are a couple of questions from the viewers that I think might be helpful to answer right now. Maria asks, can you give an example of how the design decision helped ops, or the opposite, how design decision probably did not help ops? Do you have an example from your work?
Yeah. So let's talk about something recent, right? So with the pandemic, spreading and rising. So we are a food delivery business. So people are very, very scared at this point in time to even order, right? So now we had to take in a lot of operational changes upon us, right? We had to enforce no contact delivery, wherein a delivery executive will not have any touch point with the customer, which is fundamentally very different in a place like India, especially. India is the kind of place where I am so used to saying hi to my to the guy who comes and delivers food for me. I'm used to giving him a glass of water and chit chatting for like 20 seconds to kind of find out his day. And today, now I'm in a place where I can't even see that person's face who delivers. So that's a big operational know. And here's the thing: you have to train a delivery executive to also come in a place where they cannot meet the customer, but they still have to find the house and deliver the food. So, and here are the operational challenges in this time frame, right? You cannot necessarily train these delivery executives in any way because there's no place where they can all meet now because there's a lockdown. And these are very, very new fundamental changes to how they work and their regular pattern. So if you break down from an operational angle, if you break down what a delivery executive has to do and place A to B order, there are very simple steps, and this adds a lot of steps in terms of how that user finds, how that delivery guy even finds a house. So these are very, very small increments on your system, but then they kind of have a massive operational magnitude. So in this world, I have to also make sure that my user empathizes with the situation, right? I have to make sure that the user is also careful and opts for a no contact delivery as opposed to a delivery where the delivery executive comes to their doorstep and meets them. So these are the kind of operational problems I have to battle in terms of making sure that there's an understanding between my user and my delivery executive, right? I need to leverage an empathy metric all the time. And even in the cab business, right? When I tell a user that there's a lot of traffic and your driver might be slightly delayed in terms of reaching your location, I need to work very hard to establish that empathy between my user, my and the driver, to kind of make sure that they get it. Like it's as simple as my friend calling me and telling me, dude, I'm stuck in traffic and I'm running a little late, so just be there. So I need to but then in this angle, I'm paying for a service and that service is late. So there's so many things which can go wrong in an operational setup, right? But you always have to leverage the fact that when they go right, they go very well, and you double down on creating that trust with your user, and to a point where you create a homeliness in terms of coziness, wherein people are okay with giving you that leeway. There's an empathy between on both sides where they give you that leeway. A delivery executive is pretty understanding. There's enough and more people who call the delivery executive and ask him to buy cigarettes on the way as well. And there are people who do that. And at the same time, there are people who will also be understanding if a delivery executive is late. So there are a lot of operational metrics which we meet, but product has to account for that, building that constant empathy with these users.
Yeah, Alex asked earlier, does a younger generation also feel scared about technology? We don't really know that. I think the studies that we were referring to earlier did not really draw that distinction between young and old. But I think one interesting aspect that I've been really fascinated by is, barring some countries like India, the world is aging faster than ever before. So the number of older people is much more than it used to be, right? And in large numbers and large percentage. So I think it's definitely a time, and I think there's also that quickly growing delta between people and technology. That technology is growing at such fast, such big magnitude that it's always really hard to keep up. So I wonder in 10, 15 years from now, I would be in that place where there is technology that my small brain cannot comprehend. And thus I feel really overwhelmed or scared of, right? Yeah, I can't wait for robots to start walking around in the streets, which I'm already starting to see in Singapore. Anyway, we'll come to the other questions as well, but we quickly want to go through, we're slightly over time, so we'll quickly go through this fast. So what we're really trying to say is, when we started off our design career, we thought design was everything. We went to a school surrounded by designers who inflated design, said that design could save lives, arguably, and design could change the world and whatnot. And we were really overwhelmed by that, and we went into jobs where we were told different things. So when we went to our first job, we had to think about design in the context of a user problem. We had to think about mobility or payments or software and automobiles, because that's the space where our product fit, and that's the mindset or the context that our users were in. And we had to quickly learn that and quickly understand that landscape and all the history and all the background in order to make an efficient product. And not just that, right? Zooming out once again, it's not even that we also have to learn about different themes, but it also comes in different contexts of stakeholders. Design is not an isolated experience that makes products or events happen. It has to sit with management and business and vendors and supply and operations. And it's really all of this coming together that makes a product good, makes a product successful, makes a product delightful for our users, which, taking a step back and looking back when we went to design school, we did not really think about this, or we did not really register this. Moving on to the next slide.
Yeah. So then we decided to get a lot more greedier. So for the large part of our careers, we spent a lot of time understanding and being able to navigate around our organizations and understanding how products are built in the kind of setups we are in. But we realized that we always want to keep expanding our worldview a little more, right? And we realized that we are also very interested in a lot of other topics, right? We just generally became very curious about things like wildlife and politics and conservation and healthcare and even drug trafficking. Yeah, narco season, but food and marine life and everything else. So we just realized that we want to, find out more about this, but there's no way in hell that where we can actually figure out a way where we can get exposed to all these worlds. So gave it a lot of thought, and we also understood how tech comes into this. And so Kishore has a point in terms of how we adopted these as tech.
Yeah, it's really that, right? I think so. Just a quick 30-second recap. So when we went from jumping from different jobs and different domains before we landed in our current job, and as soon as we landed in our current job, we realized that this is still not enough. We now have to figure out all these different dimensions that we did not know about, like talking business and thinking operations, all that to make a successful product. And then we also realized that technology does not exist in an isolation. It actually sits in the context of real world problems. What is happening halfway across the world still affects the way people think about your product, think about your problem space, and the way their mental models are shaped really sits into that. Like, for example, what is happening in the United States right now in terms of race and so on does affect people sitting in India and thinking about their context and how it affects their life, which then in turn affects how they use a service like Twitter or Facebook and how that's received by their end users, right? So there is all these dots that connect together to really shape users' emotions, and that's really what we're trying to learn. And for that, we started this initiative called State of Affairs. Arjun, go ahead.
So State of Affairs, the idea which we had with State of Affairs was that it's just a series of roundtable discussions wherein we wanted to put a diverse group of people together, but the idea was that they're all talking about something which they're passionate about. They all share a common passion. So we started this off as something which we just wanted to do to kill lockdown boredom, but then we realized that we wanted to kind of bring people together in a much more larger scheme of things, wherein we wanted to talk about lockdowns and innovations and healthcare and wildlife and education, etc. So we understood that the thought process was that if you put 6 or 7 people together in a room to talk about one thing, if they speak about anything for an hour, they will eventually have enough context about it to frame an opinion on whether they want to learn more about this or lesser about this. So that was the thought process, very, very fundamental idea over here, where we just started reaching out to people, right? So this slide which I have here, this was a session which we did on inclusion. So Dharmesh works heavily on understanding financial research in New India, which is like the Bharat context. Shobit works with Hotstar, where he's looking at taking an India-based product and expanding it all over the world while growing a content aggregator platform, right? So, and then we had Sharmishta from agriculture, Sarita from who's an activist and community radio person from the Northeast, and we had Laura who is working on KaiOS, right, which is basically an operating system for phones which don't even have touchscreen capability. So these are the kind of people we brought into the room. Which the idea was that these guys don't necessarily overlap in their day to day, but they are all passionate about the idea of inclusion. So we were able to have this conversation with all of them for 1 hour. And that sort of led to a lot more engaging conversations as well. So there's a small clipping we have from a recent episode which we did on wildlife. We got some amazing conservationists, a marine biologist, a nature photographer, and an environmental lawyer to kind of just talk to us about what the scenario of wildlife and conservation is in India. Right?
Especially when you talk about conservation, right, and Indians coming back to work in India, I think it's very important to understand that conservation is not really only scientific. Science is an important part of it, and academia is an important part of it. But a really important, huge part of conservation is culture. So you really understand the cultural context, I believe, only when you're in some way connected to that culture. Because when you meet people from different communities, different countries, different places, they understand their cultural context a lot better than we would. And similarly, we would understand an Indian conservation issues a lot better than someone from the West. And for too long, we've had this sort of colonial mindset when it comes to anything, right? And I think it's only the current generation, or maybe a generation before us, where it really started changing. And, the Indian conservation movement really started going ahead on its own and sort of parallelly and independently to what was happening in the West.
Really interesting, right? Like, I think before we had this conversation, we had not realized about this aspect that Sneha just spoke about, the colonial aspect of wildlife conservation and how that still influences the way people think and how efforts are done. And for us, it was, having never thought about conservation or wildlife, it was a brand new piece of information for us. So we were quite pleasantly surprised, Arjun.
So firstly, we were surprised that people tuned in. We were able to start getting a lot more people to engage with this. So it started simply as a, friends get together, like six, seven friends get together and just went about how their week's been, or like how their last month's been in the lockdown. And then eventually we started, becoming more and more specific about the kind of subjects we wanted to talk about. Right? We started then getting into talking about innovation, then getting into talking about food and technology. And then that's how we decided to move into topics which are a little less close to us, like things like inclusion and wildlife, which was something which just came out of nowhere for us. What we understood was that people did enjoy coming in and tuning in. And the big takeaway we had here was that we were actually able to make connections, right? These people who would have not run into each other in their regular scheme of things, through state of affairs, they were able to kind of get a conversation going wherein a researcher was able to work with a product person later. A podcaster was able to interview another VP, a product person, and a lawyer was able to get in touch with an activist. And these sort of conversations just triggered, and we started building these communities around us. And we were just happy that we were in a place where we could do something in terms of providing a platform for these people to come in and connect. Kishore, so you want to talk to them about how people got curious? This is exciting for us.
Yeah, and I think it's also very interesting to us how people got really curious to us, and when we were getting overwhelming amount of requests to now start live streaming this. So this really started off, again, to quickly summarize all the things that we were saying so far, right? We realized that we want to learn more and more about different things that might not be directly related to what we're doing. And this started off as a conversation for us to have and learn more, because we thought we were in some bubble that we need to have more exposure, but we got an overwhelming request on people wanting to know more. And how? So the next slide. So we had about 70 experts join this conversation, talking about a really wide range of topics. We had more than 500 people who watched this live, and we've been putting these videos on YouTube, and there are 100 plus hours worth of stream that has already happened. And what we're really trying to say is, once you recognize your curiosity and once you acknowledge your curiosity, and once you put that in the context and once you start enabling it, you will not only learn a lot from that yourself, you'll also be feeding a lot of other people's curiosity, and there will be more people who want to learn more about things that that they might not be very familiar with, or is not quite obviously related to their job. For example, when we spoke about wildlife, we had an entire hour worth of things that we did not know. And let's be real, right? We did this because we wanted to learn things. We did this because we wanted to expand our worldview. But the truth is, talking about conservation, talking about EIA, we do not know when this will come handy in our day-to-day job. We do not know where it will come handy, but we truly believe that all this will connect together sometime in the future. Like Steve Jobs famously said, we can only look back and connect these dots. We are not able to look forward and connect these dots, but we truly believe that this will make us better product thinkers. We hesitate to use the word designer because it's not necessarily restricted to designers, but product thinkers in general.
And it also has given us an excuse to, ramble the way we ramble. We enjoy that, and we finally found a justification around that as well. So that, if that helps, that kind of fuels us to do more of these anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. There are two questions that we want to, couple of questions that we want to get to, right? Sujit asked, hi, Arjun and Kishore, I wanted to ask you, how do you reach a conclusion when there is a difference of opinion between product manager and UX designer? Is there any structured framework to the discussion to reach a conclusion, specifically in cases where there is time pressure and the designer feels strongly about user experiences, but the PM does not buy into the vision? Yeah, this is a I don't know, 6 month worth of conversation, I think. It's really hard, and I think it comes down to both. We spoke about design in length, mostly because we think about design in the context of our jobs. And we spoke about design bleeding into product manager and business and so on, right? It does not end there. It is also true in the opposite way. I've been fortunate to work with product managers who can think UX arguably better than me. I don't know if that's necessarily a good reflection on my skills, but I think the most important thing is both the teams, both the parties to take effort in building that common language. And I think you called it out right here, is building that shared vision that people truly believe in. At Google, I think we've used design sprints as a great mechanism to do that. We do that over 4 days. Please search for Google Design Sprint Framework. Hopefully you can use that at your job as well. This is not a plug, but that 4 days when different stakeholders come together, solve the same problem, I cannot emphasize how much that helps, because A, there is it's time boxed into 4 or 5 days. B, everyone who's related to that product directly is involved: engineers, product managers, marketing, business development, everyone. And the framework also requires you to move through them at a certain speed, which forces you to make some hard decisions, mostly in a democratic way. And you also get to influence everyone's thinking in a reasonable way. So design sprints has been exceptionally helpful for me in my job to build alignment. And I don't know, Arjun, do you have anything to add?
Actually, in my scenario, I think the concept of time, right? This is something I've seen a lot of designers, especially in Indian companies, have a problem with. You're always chasing time, and that's everyone who's building. So at this point of time, like basically we see what helps us usually is that we kind of give ourselves these early stage principles on these product briefs, right? And all these small decisions, we start equating them to those early stage principles and start questioning in whether this elevates that or not. And then we kind of pitch that idea to the fact that there's time, and we say whether it's worth it or not. But more often than not, it's easier to solve these conversations between your product manager itself, right? It's a give and take. There will be compromises which we make as well, and there will be compromises which you will ask of product to make. because your product manager is still going and having a lot more tough conversations on your part as well. He's going and having conversations with engineering and business. So you need to make a strong case for the user experience at this point of time as well, right? But more often than not, there is a compromise on both sides, and it's a give and take. You just need to establish those ground rules with the principles. And once you have those principles in place for that brief, the conversation with that product manager becomes easier. The conversation with that, and sometimes you might just reach a point where you'll say, you know what, let's take some more time. But if this is going to be a good value add for your user, let's do it. You will be able to achieve that conversation with your product manager as long as both of you are in the same thought process in terms of the vision you have for the product. So that's something if we crack early on. So I've noticed that as companies grow, they all spend a lot more time on aligning each other early on, right? As opposed to later on. Because the idea is that if everyone has a shared vision, then everyone's empowered enough to kind of just go and do what they do best. So that early stage alignment, if you crack that, I think after that, these conversations will become much more easier.
There's a question from Saina. As a product manager aspirant, what are some essential design UX knowledge that we need to have? Can you talk about some essential tools or resources or principles that we can learn about? I think so this is controversial. I actually think the line between product management and UX is blurring really, really quickly. I am of a belief that in the next 15 or 20 years, there might not be specialized jobs, which means that you really need to empathize with your users, right? This is very anecdotal, so I'm no authority to say what a product manager should do to be good at UX. But in my experience, the best product managers that I've worked with, take time to understand where UX is coming from. What is a UX rationale for a certain decision or a certain point of view? B, helps the designers that they work with learn about product management and about metrics and about funnels as much as they themselves do. So you're trying to really level the field here so that you're not holding anything to yourself, right? And the third is really equip UX designers to do their best job by involving in the process as much as they would like you to. So for example, some of the best product managers I've worked with is hands-on on research, talk to users, build that empathy themselves, as opposed to sitting and consuming decks or synthesis that comes out of some of these user studies, right? So that's from a principles and like from just being exposed to the process. I think that has really, really helped. Tools, honestly, is always changing. So I don't know if it's, I don't know if necessarily there are good tools to really equip that, but just using the design tools that your UX designer is using in some way. You don't have to be a designer, you don't have to know all the features, but just being able to change a text here, there, I think that goes a long way. Arjun, did you have anything to add?
And yeah, to add to your point about tools, right? Tools are just like us, methods for us to just develop clarity. I've seen product managers who have, given me massive product clarity with just a Google Doc, right? And as opposed to me having spent a week on like a high fidelity prototype, right? So I think tools wise, I don't think we should be worried about picking up any tool, because it's just whatever fits your mission objective. Like, let's say if you want to develop and focus focus your storytelling more along product prototypes, you would do that as opposed to a business person who would basically look at tools which have like a data science angle to them or like a consumer analytics angle to them. So I don't think tools is something we need to be worried about. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the place where we'll all be in a place where the roles will be blurred, and the conversations you'll be having with your business counterparts and your product counterparts will be very, very organic. It'll feel natural, I think. And that's sort of how we have tailored our conversations, and that's how organizations are themselves priming themselves. I've seen enough and more people shuffle between design to product management and product management to business and business to product management as well. So it's nice to see where we're headed. So hopefully we'll be in a much more funner place in a few years as well with the blur.
Yeah. Harsha asked, any specific habits you want to talk about which complements your work and eventually helps in connecting the dots apart from brainstorming with friends from diverse backgrounds? It's a really good question. I think one thing, of course, is not trying to force fit everything into your work. It will come naturally, and that just trusting that system, that comes in really handy. I try to read a lot of books that are not directly related to my job. Just again, sometimes it's about processes, sometimes it's about other companies and products and so on. Right now, I'm reading a book called CEO Factory, which talks about Hindustan Unilever and like the principle of how that company functions. And I'm already unintentionally incorporating a lot of things that I read into my work. That's really helped me. It's a very deep question. Arjun, do you have?
Yeah, this is something which will take us quite a while to cover, actually, right? But it comes down to that. I am actually very comfortable with having having the know-how. Like I know for a fact that I can spend time and effort in understanding another person's point of view, and it's important to me. Like, let's say I'm working with a product manager. This is a person I've been working in for 3 years. I owe it to that equation I have with that person. I owe it to the products I've shipped with this person to be able to speak that person's language, right? So it comes with the effort behind it comes very naturally after a while. So I don't think there's not much to it, and it's come to a point where we all share reading lists. Like to point to Kishore's anecdote about reading books outside of your comfort zone as well. So we're all in this together, right? We might think that designers are the only ones who are having these sort of questions in mind. It's not true. Your product manager is also trying to expand their worldview. Like they also want to come and relate with you. And that's true to everyone who you work with. They want to walk into a room and be able to have a conversation which they understand, right? So I think that fundamental premise, once you're aligned with and once you've internalized that, I think it'll be very easy. All the decisions you make around it will become fairly easy.
Yeah, I think, I'm going through this phase where, like Arjun said, I'm trying to break my comfort and try to do things that I was typically uncomfortable about, be it in the context of job, doing projects that I am slightly scared of, even it could be outside of the job in my daily life, learning a new instrument or things like that. Just makes me more curious and opens me up to different situations, even at work, having that whole learning mindset. I think that's really helped. I know it's not a conclusive answer, but
yeah. I mean, speaking of instruments, like sometimes you just give up. Like you find out that some things are just not for you. You move on quickly. So fail fast and move on. So that's my big learning, which I've understood after trying to pick up a guitar. But yeah, sorry. Let's take. Do we have time? Are we good on time, Carol?
Hey, thank you everyone for your questions. Yeah, I think we have like 10 more minutes. We can do maybe 2 or 3.
Should we take the next? Do you want to take the next question, Kishore?
So the next question is, we'll take one question. Unless it's aimed at one of us, we'll just switch between the questions. How do you generally validate your hypothesis and assumptions that were made during the phase of designing? How often do you get to be in touch with the customers for it at Swiggy or Google Pay? At Google Pay, very, very frequently, practically once in a month. It's also, I truly believe that having access to users and having a research team who can kind of bridge that gap is a privilege. I've been in different teams and different contexts, even at Google, where we did not have researchers and researchers to help us do that, right? So very frequently, how do you validate your hypothesis? Sometimes, I think, so the way I think about validating hypothesis is there are times where you need to follow your instinct and not blindly go with what the user said or the feedback that you got in user research. Again, this is controversial because then why do the user research at all, right? My school of thought is that you need to lean into your instincts to take product decisions, thus pushing the envelope and creating designs, creating features, creating products that no one else has thought about. So that risk is very critical. But you should use research to shape your instinct, to inform your instinct. So you should take all that information in. Sometimes you feel like you should follow that route. Sometimes you think that I hear the insight that we got, but I think there is a risk that is valuable for us to take. And if things don't go well, yes, we know that we heard this, so we can quickly fall back to decision. So it kind of quickly comes down to not taking irreversible risks, but if it is irreversible, go ahead and take that leap of faith based on your instinct, based on the insights you got, and you'll see the product innovation happening at a much better pace when you do more and more of that. Arjun, you can take the next question, which is, speak about storytelling. Can you tell more about it and when it's applying in a case study in which it applies?
So in this context, right, I wouldn't necessarily talk about a specific case study, but let's talk about a general outlook towards how we approach like, let's say, a new brief. Let's say a business person has an idea which they want to explore, or better yet, if you want to pitch a business idea to the organization, right? So how do you actually go about storytelling? You need to understand your room, right? You need to understand who you're speaking to. That once you understand that you're talking to, let's say, an operations mind or a supply mind or a product management mind, one big thing which factors in is that you need to make sure that your narrative is set in a way that it shows that you give a damn, right? This is what we need to kind of crack early stage, that a lot of our storytelling should not be flippant. It should come from a place where you are concerned about what you all are building together. So once you set those ground rules, it becomes much more easier. Then you're basically making after that your designer chops kick in, and you're basically visualizing for them, right? The story is that you are visualizing the business idea for them. You're visualizing the product angle for them as well. So after that, it's a very homely conversation. Once you've established that you're all on the same side, and once you've established the kind of places where your business counterpart and your product counterpart and your supply counterpart is coming in and elevating your product experience, right? So that kind of helps me a lot in storytelling. And also I am sort of open to change when I bring in, let's say a new idea onto the table. I am fairly open to change in terms of how I invite more and more insight into this. And again, here, something which Kishore spoke about just a while ago is something we need to guard against. Your instincts need to be on edge over here. Like there's some things which can happen when you go into these storytelling meetings where your opinion might be swayed, right? But here, your instinct and your faith in your research and your process and the ability you have to navigate in your organization comes into play. But bottom line is, you just need to come from a place of concern where you know you're building something which is better for your product. So once you can answer that to yourself, it will be very easy to build that storytelling tool and also to have the conversation with other people.
Yeah. I give the next question to Arjun, but I'll take the one after that right away. Talking about MVP, time crunch, and pressure that comes with it, do you think design sprints can actually give way for implementing the actual process of design thinking? In my experience, absolutely yes, provided one factor, which is everyone who is going into the design sprint and the execs who are sponsoring that design sprint truly believes that design sprints are valuable and they're willing to employ the design ideas that come out of the design sprint. These two conditions, I cannot emphasize how critical it is, because if you have people inside the design sprint in the room who does not believe in this process, there is no point in spending 5 days. So what I usually tell teams is, if there is no buy-in from the people in the room, don't even go ahead with the design sprint. You have more deeper problems to solve as an organization or as a team. The second one is stakeholder buy-in. Like I said, design sprint is fairly democratic process. I've been in situations where some stakeholders are not comfortable executing the idea that people came up with in a democratic way. If you don't have that buy-in, design sprints are not effective because it's 5 days and so many people, roughly around 7-8 people. So it's not really impactful. But that said, if you have alignment on these two aspects from the team, from the stakeholders, from the execs, I cannot emphasize how efficient design sprints have been to unblock us, either because we did not have the right idea or because everyone were kind of going back and forth without taking decision. Just getting everyone in the room and saying, all of you are equally responsible for solving this problem, regardless of your background. I think that goes a long way in solving.
Should I take the next one?
Yeah.
What about working with smaller businesses versus international ones like Google? How do you convince them to invest in product development? So this is actually a very interesting question. I've been retrospecting a lot about this. So I've been fairly lucky because of, even though I've joined companies which are fairly young throughout my career, I've had the luxury of having predecessors before me and peers around me who have already met certain benchmarks and who have made that conversation fairly easy in terms of me pitching product development. But having said that, there's a benchmark you always have to meet and keep pushing forward, right? So product development, the thing is that these companies need to see an output first, right? You can't just excite them with storytelling. Again, this is where your ability to speak their language comes in a big way, right? You need to excite them with these with your product ideas for them to invest that time and effort in product development. It's a simple, that's why we invest a lot more time in alignment. We'll invest a lot more time in speaking the same language as your early stage founders. And trust me, in smaller companies, there is a need to innovate and like come up with something fresh, because there is so much competition out there in any sort of early stage startup. There's still an eye, and there's an angle of competition. There's an angle of time that you might run out of, let's say, angel money and things like that. There's so many of these realities. So if you can navigate around this and then still make product development a part of that fabric, then that's like big kudos, right? So I think it's not a very difficult conversation today in today's day and age, because uh, uh, companies know that product is a core differentiator for them, right? Unless you're Geo, but forget I said that. But
Yeah.
so to kind of summarize your point, I think it's just easy to have that conversation once you start knowing how to kind of pitch these ideas forward to people who are not necessarily from a product development background. You need to tell them that there is meat to this idea. There is a monetization angle to this idea. There is something you can see at the end of the day.
Sorry, I missed the question on with the abundance of information on our fingertips. The major problem is to find the right information. How do you filter that? Any solutions? Great question. We've been talking about. In fact, we've been talking about doing an entire episode on misinformation on state of affairs, because we ourselves are trying to put that context together in our heads. I mean, the truth is, people who are here are much more privileged than a lot others, like my parents, who cannot validate the information that's coming on their WhatsApp, right? My parents still think India's national anthem is the best in the world. But so we have a certain privilege of being able to check the authenticity. But I think generally, like the research aspect that I said earlier, the rule of thumb is not to take anything in its face value. Have that critical thinking in your head about most of the things that you hear, and really dig deeper. Sometimes it's reading up Wikipedia articles, and that's an entire rabbit hole by itself. Sometimes it's about referring that to a expert and asking about that. I remember every time the annual budget is announced, I spend some time with my friends who are experts in economics, just trying to break this down and trying to see if this is good for me or not. So just trying to really validate that, I think really help. And I also think Twitter is a good place to see opposing views on the same topic and kind of get two sides of the story. It's still a bubble, no doubt. Twitter is a certain kind of user and persona, no doubt. But in my experience, more often than not, you get two sides of the story on Twitter as well. What kind of KPIs are available to measure the success of product UX or graphics? Great question. So one important thing is the metrics that UX is looking at and the metrics that product is looking at should never be at odds. They should complement each other, but they should never contradict with each other, right? As a UX designer, I try to align most of my North Star metrics, so to say, with that of the product. I try to empower that really, and I add on to that. Sometimes it's a delight factor, which we either do through different rating systems from within the app. We look at Play Store sentiments, we look at user studies and hear what people are saying, both on a qualitative aspect, so which is 10, 15, 20 users at a time, but also zooming out and having the sentiment at a quantitative, in a quantitative way. So we send out emails with forms, We look at all these different social media platforms where comments are rolling in and try to get a sense of how people think about different products.
I think
Arjun, you want to take the next one, which is how good is the tolerance for failures at companies like yours? Also, how do companies build stage gates to avoid mass failures?
So I think fear of failure increases as the company grows. I've noticed this, right? I've seen that a lot of early stage companies are more willing to take risks because, like, I remember for a fact that when Ola was trying to understand what space they were getting into, right? There was a full cycle of like a full year of new products which we just launched. You know, like we dabbled in share passes and ride passes, and like we dabbled in electric and play and rickshaws and the whole shebang. So the ability to take risk was much higher at that point of time. But now there's a surety in terms of knowing what parts of the business work, right? So then the tolerance starts going a little less. So that's why I think Indian companies have kind of figured out this whole way of building MVPs, right? And when you build an MVP, there is a certain buy-in, there's a certain understanding that this might fail, but then we try to make sure that we dissect all these failures and we bring it back in a way that it makes sense, it makes more sense. So the idea is that you can fail. The outlook these companies mostly have is that it's okay to fail, but then you don't necessarily just let that go at that point of time. You understand why you dissect and understand why you fail, and then you re-innovate those products. So that's the tolerance most companies do have, right? But I've noticed that as a company becomes slightly bigger, the tolerance to failure becomes a little more, it becomes a little more tricky, right? In terms of whether, the risk-taking aspect itself becomes a little different. Like you focus your risks on very, very carefully strategized bets as opposed to things which make sense at that point of time and might not make sense later. So tolerance is fairly high in most companies, but it's about understanding how to navigate these failures as well. So what happens after the failure is what you should be thinking of as well. So it's something we should be covering for as designers and as product thinkers.
Great. I think we've come at the end of the questions. So as we sum up, thanks everyone for joining. There are at least 32 of you still here. Thank you so much for listening to us for so long. Really appreciate that. Carol is posting a bunch of links in the chat section. I'll hand off to Carol in a second. So please look at all the links that's coming through in the comment section. Also, if you're still here and if you found this helpful, please consider donating to the different charities that Carol mentioned earlier. We would really, really appreciate if you did that. Only if you find it useful, no pressure. Carol, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Kishore and Aaron, for such an insightful session on designs today. Thank you to you guys. So I believe everyone joined today has learned a lot from this session. So let me just share my last slides. So I really want to say special thanks to everyone who has made a donation to this talk. I want to thank Edwin, Veronica, Suraj, Santosh, Jajan, Adam, Bai, Achutana, Yash, Richard, Anom, Graha, Hemant. So thank you guys for your kind donations. Anyway, we'll be sent you an email shortly after the session. So just before I end this meeting for today, could I ask just everyone to open up your cameras and we can take a big group photos, group screenshot. Can I get everyone to turn on your cameras so I can take a group screenshot? Everyone who has joined us. I can see Yash. Hi Yash. Hi Stella. Hi Vishnu. Hi Sana. Hi Dayani.
Oh, Dhyani is here. Hi, Dhyani.
Hi,
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining in, guys. This is a lot of fun for us. We hope it was informative to you as well.
Yeah, we're also saying this is really a conversation starter. We haven't scratched the surface in terms of how deep we want to go into this topic. So hit us up on wherever, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. We would love to have follow-up conversation and really shape this thinking as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Cool, guys. Okay. Are you guys ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you guys. great
Awesome.
session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks so much,
Arun.
Captain.
Yeah, everyone have a nice weekend.
Yeah, have a nice weekend, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye, guys.